With the start of the new year, we're going to take a look at something a little retro. The last hurrah of the indie studio Zachtronics, known primarily for various kinds of solitaire and notably rather difficult puzzle games, comes what I'd say is the hardest game ever produced by them. The game is a look back at a fictional computer and a fictional game maker, the story of how he started and the progress he made throughout the years and how it all stemmed from the programs on this old computer. Of course, this means we're going to be dealing with a lot of confusing puzzles and programming allegories, as well as a totally not Gundam model builder that I may have spent a little too much time on. This is Last Call BBS. If you couldn't already tell from my previous description or the dial-up sounds I probably played for you just now, this game is going for that old retro computer aesthetic. The BBS, as it's called, is an old-school dial-up computer that has been used to make and download little games here and there. The very same games that you now have to download via the fastest dial-up connection known to man. They've got all the nostalgic computer noises baked into the game, from chunky mouse clicks, keyboard clacks, the aforementioned dial-up connection, to even hearing the computer go through the shutdown process when you click the quit button. All in all, the sound design is excellent for getting across that retro feel. The music and visuals are where I think things get a bit more modern. It certainly sounds compressed, but it doesn't feel quite as authentic to me as everything else does. That's not to say it's not well made, no. It's very well made, very pretty to look at and listen to, which I think should absolutely be the priority here. It feels more like what people imagine old desktop computers looked and sounded like, rather than necessarily being what they looked and sounded like. Going for that sort of memory authenticity rather than actual authenticity, which I think certainly worked out in this game. Nostalgia is a powerful thing indeed. And speaking of nostalgia, what story is there? Like most Zachtronic games, the story is not that big of an element compared to the rest of the game. Now, it is there and it does seem pretty nice, but it's more like the Dark Souls kind of storytelling than anything else. The way you know you're making progress in the game is when you get these little notepad dialogues from the guy who gave you this vintage Sawayama BBS computer. As you explore the different games and programs on it, you'll reach certain milestones where you'll learn about how each one relates to how the narrator grew as a person and in his career. You'll be told anecdotes about the times, places, and people involved in the development of these games and how they relate back to his life, that sort of thing. It's a nice little motivator to keep you going and a good way to tell the player that they're on the right track, and I imagine that the story being told to you is related in some way to the life of the studio's founder, Zach, but that's mostly just speculation on my part. I have no idea if that's true. Regardless, it's a neat little story. However, we must now discuss the most important part of a Zachtronics game, the puzzles. As you can probably see from the footage, this game doesn't exactly hold your hand. In fact, it does the exact opposite of that. It leads you into a room full of puzzles, the main desktop screen, and then leaves you alone to figure out what to do. Sure, you'll get a little notepad dialogue telling you how to download the games and maybe a basic explanation of the rules, but each game is far more complicated than what the basic rules say. Now, I won't go into detail on every puzzle game here, because there are quite a few, but I'll mention the most notable ones in my opinion. The Forbidden Path is probably the most obtuse and cryptic of the puzzle games. You don't even get a basic explanation of the concept, just a story about this guy being obsessed with using video games as the next big art form, which probably explains the aesthetic of it being an H.R. Geiger nightmare. It becomes easier once you piece together what's actually happening in terms of rules, which is essentially a big allegory for programming, another staple Zachtronics theme. So if you think about it in terms of a programming script, like start here, do this, then that, etc., it'll be easier, but still very much difficult. I got way too invested in Hanafuda Solitaire and the Totally Not Gundam model building game too. The latter isn't even an actual puzzle game really, it's just a toy to build and paint a few select Gundam style models with. Although the painting part is not exactly precise from my experience. And then there's the sci-fi Puyo Puyo style arcade game thing that you're supposed to be emulating on the Sawayama. I found it to be the easiest to understand in terms of controls. It is meant to be an arcade game after all, but man is it difficult. It's meant for the hardcore arcade puzzle players out there. I couldn't even beat the first level. I just barely get to the end before it all falls apart and I have to start all over. So yeah, your mileage may vary with these puzzles, and as a result, the game as a whole. And that is Last Call BBS, the last hurrah for Zachtronics, who announced this was their final project before disbanding the studio and moving on to new things. I totally respect that decision, and I feel that this game is a very suitable send-off in respect to Zachtronics' legacy in the world of puzzle games. As for whether or not this game is for you, well, I think you might have figured it out by now. It's a very love it or hate it kind of thing. Again, like a lot of Zachtronics games. If you're really into puzzle games and you're really into stuff that's really obtuse and difficult, then it might be for you. If not, well then it might not be. This has been TheRatMan, and I will see you all later. And lastly, a thank you shout out to Mike Uniturtle. Thank you for the $5.